tuned for the Joan Quinn Profiles. As an editor for Andy Warhol's Interview, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, LA Style, and Detour magazines, Joan covered the social set, the Hollywood hotshots, the international art scene, the mysteries of food, the excitement of travel, and the fabulous world of fashion. Joan continues to find creative people on the cutting edge who make things happen. Here's Joan Agajanian Quinn.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome to the Joan Quinn Profiles. Our guests today are filmmaker Eugene Jarecki and artist, actor Dwayne Hickman, who's known to all of us as Dobie Gillis. We were on location when we interviewed director-filmmaker Eugene Jarecki about his film, Why We Fight. The film won the Grand Jury Prize at the 2005 Sundance Film Festival, and Eugene is the brother of another award-winning filmmaker, Andrew Jarecki. We'll be seeing a little bit of Why We Fight, and then we'll show you the interview with Eugene Jarecki, filmmaker of Why We Fight.
We live here in the United States of amnesia. No one remembers anything before Monday morning. Everything is a blank. We have no history.
Guatemala, 1954. The United States intervened unilaterally to protect its vital interests. Lebanon, 1958. The United States feels its policy of containment in the Middle East is threatened. Responds openly and unilaterally. The United States intervened in Laos, the Congo, Brazil.
There are so many theories about what happened in Iraq and why we really went in, but when you look at the history of the United States, almost every president, there is something we don't like somewhere in the world, and we've got to dispense military force.
Ronald Reagan invaded Grenada in 1983.
Last night, I ordered U.S. military forces to Panama.
This is not about one president or one party. We fight as a nation because we perceive it is in our interest to fight. And we then mention words like freedom and nice common values that who can be against freedom, when in fact much more has been going on privately.
Hi, Eugene.
Hello.
Lots of excitement about your film, Why We Fight.
I hope so.
Yeah, in 2002, The Trials of Henry Kissinger also was well received like that, because you won an Amnesty International Award and you were nominated for an Independent Spirit Award. Why was that so popular?
I think maybe we were at the beginning in 2002 of a kind of a sense among the public that there was a need for us as a people to look more closely at our history and at the way public policy decisions are made, especially as it pertains to war in America.
So was that your first documentary?
No, that was my first documentary looking sort of intimately and closely and critically at the American system.
So many people were interested in the Henry Kissinger. When you made your next documentary, which was Why We Fight, were you going to make it about an individual?
No, that was what was interesting when we made the film about Henry Kissinger, was that I found that people kind of got caught up in the sort of cult of personality about Henry Kissinger, and I really thought I was making a movie about the American political system and about why we go to war and how we go to war, the system. And instead, it turned out that people thought it was about an individual, and that's very understandable because Henry Kissinger was very central. With Why We Fight, I really looked to go deeper, to really look deeply at the world around us, about who we are in it, and try to figure out how all of us play a part.
So it couldn't really be on one person then?
Well, not at all. I mean, the system that we're looking at, the American war system, the reason that America fights and why we find ourselves so often at war in this country, scratching our heads later saying, how did we get here? That's a question much larger than any one president, than one administration, than any one individual.
So is it fair to say that it came about because of what you learned after the Henry Kissinger film?
Yeah, there's no question. Why We Fight is a sort of a process of my coming of age as a filmmaker and learning much sort of deeper hidden truths about the way things work in Washington, the way things work and why we go to war, than I ever could have known when I was starting to make the Kissinger film.
When we talk about individuals, it seems like you used Eisenhower's theme, his military-industrial complex.
Yes. Well, I think as Americans, we are all part of this cult of personality. We look to figures like Henry Kissinger, perhaps as a villain, Dwight Eisenhower as a hero. We're all party to that. We all love to have heroes in our lives, and it's nice to know who the heroes are by being able to recognize who the villains may be. With this film, even though the film in many ways heroizes Dwight Eisenhower and takes its inspiration from his farewell address, where he warned about the military-industrial complex, the film tries to go much more deep and look at a lot of characters whose stories intersect with the American war story to try to understand how we all fit into it.
What did that military-industrial complex phrase really mean? Because from your film, it looks like it was the start, the jumping-off point of what was going on.
I think there's no question that America is in a strange time of transition. This is a country that was born as a republic. It broke off from an empire with the idea to really do things differently. And what has happened over a couple hundred years is a kind of slippery slope, where unfortunately we are really slipping away from those republican origins towards something very imperial again. And the costs of empire are quite complicated and frightening, particularly dangerous to the health of the democracy. And Dwight Eisenhower's farewell warning about the military-industrial complex was really one of the early messengers warning us about those costs of empire, of becoming too big.
That's what he was pointing out then.
I think so.
And then you used you used a couple of people from the Eisenhower family. How did you find them, and how readily available were they to talk to you?
The Eisenhower family has been wonderfully supportive of the film, and I think they understood from early on that I was really trying to tell Americans that Dwight Eisenhower, once upon a time, really understood so much about where we find ourselves today. He predicted this all almost down to the last gun shell casing. And the reality is that I think what Eisenhower brings to us is a very haunting message from the past about the dangers of letting this country go in a direction so far from our founding ideals. And the family was very supportive.
Did his son feel the same way, and his granddaughter? Because those were the two people you used.
John Eisenhower, who's Eisenhower's son, and Susan Eisenhower, a granddaughter who also appears in the film, are very much Americans who, in the spirit of Dwight Eisenhower, are unafraid of looking with kind of tough love at this country, looking deeply at it and being able to recognize its strengths as well as its faults in an effort to make tomorrow reflect our ideals even more than today. And I respect that greatly.
You know, the title is not really very unique, isn't it? Legendary filmmaker Frank Capra used that title.
Yeah.
And he made some films during World War II?
During World War II. In 1942, Frank Capra was asked by the military to make the Why We Fight series, a series of films exploring our reasons for entering World War II. And a lot of people have said, well, you stole Frank Capra's title. And I admit I did. In fact, I really stole his entire film. I think that Frank Capra, if he were alive today, would have made exactly the film that I've made. He was a devoted advocate of democracy. He was trying to protect democracy from forces that could compromise it, and he was always out for the little guy, to defend the little guy against those forces. I hope to think that my film does that, and that Frank Capra would be proud I made it.
I think it takes us to the part that shows you did have a neutral approach, but all the presidents seem to use scare tactics along the way. All the clips that you use, like Truman and the atomic bomb, and Johnson with the Gulf of Tonkin, and you brought this term preemptive out.
I think the Iraq War is not the first war in our history where we find ourselves at a much later time scratching our heads and wondering how we ended up here. The Vietnam War certainly had that, where the Gulf of Tonkin episode, which launched the war, was later on looked at with some question as to what had actually happened. And it's not the first time that a catalyzing incident for a war has come under some question. In fact, the sinking of the Maine, you may remember, that began Spanish-American War. That was another situation where the idea was that often the catalyzing incident much later comes into question, and I think that's all too often true, because what's really happening is that forces are driving us to war that it wouldn't be polite to tell the public about. And so it's much easier to point to a kind of catalyzing episode.
And so they all seem to use that same kind of thing, whether they're one party or the other party.
Yes,
really.
It's not party specific. I mean, there's a big myth in America that Republicans somehow own the copyright on war. They don't. Any quick look at the wars of the 20th century will show you that a disproportionate number have in fact even been run by Democrats. War is party blind. The forces that cause it have all of our policymakers in their grip, what Eisenhower called the sort of holding captive of public policymakers. That's what he was afraid of, and I'm afraid of that.
That's why I thought it was so interesting, the approach you took. But one of the things that was so almost scary to me was the access that you had to that sensitive material, to see a bomb being made, to see that woman pushing the bomb around in your film. How
Right.
did you gain that access?
We were very fortunate from early on to have been given approval by the Pentagon to have access up and down the chain of command to talk to people at all levels in the military establishment, and that served the film greatly, and it really taught me a great deal because it put me face to face with people in the military to understand, you know, the military is often given sort of a little less understanding than they deserve for being an organization of far more deep-thinking people than we are led to believe. After all, they have the most to gain or lose from these kind of enterprises.
One of the things is it is an independent documentary, and a lot of people worked on it. How long did it take you to make, and what was the budget?
The film took a little under 3 years to make, and it was about $1 million budget.
Oh, it was. And do you get the answer to your title? Why We Fight?
I think what the movie hopes to do is, rather than provide answers, it hopes to raise questions and promote in the public a desire to know more deeply what is really going on and to not just take what we're often told, the sort of cliches about democracy and freedom, and even the cliches about the simplicity, oh, we're in it for the oil. There's a much more textured set of answers as to why we're doing what we're doing, and the public's duty, really, is to protect this country by understanding the forces that have us in their hold.
Well, before we leave, I think the big drama was the way you opened it. Lots of cuts, big music. Who's responsible for all that action?
That's the team that's putting the film together between myself, the composer, the editor, Nancy
great.
Kennedy. Yes, the composer, Robert Miller, is wonderful. And basically, we all come together and we were all inspired by the same desire to get at the heart of this question and to really encourage the public to think more deeply. And the only way you're going to do that is to make a very entertaining film.
It was entertaining, and the big thing that you hit us with after you opened and caught our attention was that term blowback.
Yes. Blowback is a remarkable term that comes actually out of the CIA itself. What it goes to is the unintended consequences of our actions overseas, often secret actions, that come around to haunt us. And the CIA warned us in the 1950s about some of the first covert actions that were being undertaken in the Middle East, that they might one day come back and haunt us. And I dare say that what we're seeing unfold in the Middle East today is, in a form, a kind of blowback that's unfortunately affecting all of us.
And the group of people that you talk about think tanks being so important today in politics, and a lot of those people were from those think tanks.
Yes. I think Dwight Eisenhower predicted this military-industrial complex, and I think what we're discovering today is that there's kind of a fourth arm of it, which is the think tanks, the role of what are called defense intellectuals in really popularizing some of the notions that are really just the most coveted desires by the military-industrial sector, things they'd like to do, toys they'd like to try out, systems they'd like to develop. All of a sudden we find those mentioned in academic treatises that are read by policymakers, and one thing affects the other, and we find that public policy is being influenced by these forces far more than we realize.
But how important are they? I mean, how do they choose those people to be in those think tanks? I mean, we could have think tanks going all different ways.
There are think tanks all over America, and if you showed my film to a lot of them, they'd say, we don't have any influence, we can't even get a voice in Washington, and yet there are other think tanks, and I guess it's the idea that not all think tanks are created equal, or that some think tanks are more equal than others. I think in this case, this administration clearly had a favoritism for a certain range of think tanks that were promoting a kind of imperial project for the world that included the war in Iraq and beyond, and I think it's the duty of all of us to look far more closely at the recommendations being followed.
You brought up the idea of showing it to think tanks. Did the participants in your film see your film before it was released?
Many of the participants in the film have seen the film, not everybody, and I think everybody will start to see it January 20th when it comes out in theaters.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hi, I'm Joan Quinn, and welcome back to the Joan Quinn Profiles. I'm here with actor, artist Dwayne Hickman, who was born and raised in Los Angeles.
Yes.
He graduated from Loyola University with a BS in economics. And at 6 years old, Dwayne was making his film debut.
Yeah, Grapes of Wrath.
Is that what?
Grapes of Wrath. Yeah, I worked. You know. I'll tell you how I know that, because when I was trying to get Social Security and all that, they looked up old records, and I worked 2 days in 1940.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I made about $20.
And then you went
in
on
2 days
for your first TV series with Bob Cummings.
Well, that was much later. That was '53.
Well, were you working in between?
Yeah, I did some work as a child. I did some child acting. My mother dragged me to the studio because I had an older brother, Daryl, who was an actor. He's 3 years older. So she had to go to the studio with him, and she dragged me along. And all of a sudden they felt sorry and gave me a line here and a line there, and I didn't like it much. And you know,
But did your brother like it?
Yeah, I think he did. He was better at it than I am.
He was. You were more. Were
Yeah,
you shy?
I was always very shy. Yeah, you very shy, and I never cared much about acting.
But here you are with Bob Cummings. I mean, and all those great people on that show all the time.
Well, yeah, we had Rosemary DeCamp, who was wonderful, and Ann B. Davis, who played Schultze,
she
and of
was
course
great.
Bob himself, who was a great factor in my career. He was like my teacher, my mentor.
I
He
know.
taught me comedy.
And you were so young.
Yes, well,
You
I
were-
was like 18, 19 by
Well,
then.
you were I mean, that was really a big thing because those are the things that we're all watching now.
Well, yeah, and they're better than many of the new shows.
That's right.
And they're clean.
And we like
You know,
them,
they're clean. We
right?
got big laughs, and we didn't do off-color jokes.
I
you know?
had to mention that, you know, everyone thinks of you as Dobie Gillis because that
well,
was like
that's one of those
so-
things. That was such a big show, and I was young, and you know, it went off the air in '63.
I know, but it's like yesterday. It's a
100 years ago.
phenomenon,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah, it is a phenomenon.
Do people still call you Dobie Gillis?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
All the time. Well,
Yeah.
that's what I kept thinking. I was going, can I call him Dobie
Oh,
Gillis?
you can call me anything, you know.
How many years was that on?
4 years.
Really not long compared to
no,
what's happening to
no.
the shows now.
And they did about 149 shows, and it's still running on and off.
So do people recognize you on the street?
Unfortunately, yes.
Your
sometimes.
kids?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Kids of the kids of the kids. You know.
Exactly. But
Uh-huh.
those were like cult things, kind of.
Well,
Weren't they
Dobie was
cult
a very
TV?
special show. Dobie was the first show that dealt with teens from a teen point of view. You know, I had those monologues. I said, I'm Dobie Gillis, I'm 17, and all I want is a girl, one lousy girl my whole life, you know.
Oh, so it
one
was-
round, soft, creamy, dreamy girl for my very own. And so I was talking about the angst of a teenager.
Oh, that's what it was. And
Yeah.
then the movies that you made with with Annette Funicello.
Well,
and
those were much later.
Frankie
Those were
Avalon.
after Dobie, and those were like in the middle 60s, you know, Ski Party.
So we
How
did
to Stuff-
40s, 50s.
Yes.
Now we're into the 60s.
Yeah,
Ski Party. What else?
How to Stuff a Wild Bikini, Ski Party,
Oh,
Dr.
right.
Goldfoot and the Bikini Machine. Now, there's a great picture. There's a great
don't
picture.
even
With a
remember
title,
that
well,
one.
that was Vincent Price and Frankie Avalon.
Oh.
And,
wow, Frankie Avalon was in a lot of movies then.
Oh, yeah, he was under contract to AIP, and they made a lot of teen pictures.
So those were the AIP films. Were the
But I
ones
made a
that
good
were,
one. I made Cat Ballou.
I was just going to bring that up.
I was in Cat Ballou. And that
because
was
that's what it's going to. It got an Oscar.
yeah, for Lee Marvin.
Right. But
Uh-huh.
so did you get an Oscar too because you were in it?
No.
No.
Lee Marvin got the Oscar. You know, I got.
But did the film win, or just
no.
did he win? Oh,
Just
I
Lee.
see. That's what
Yeah.
I was wondering if you have an Oscar, if everyone gets an Oscar.
Oh no, just Lee, and it was a big deal for him to get that.
You did a lot of stage too in between.
Yeah, the stage was not my thing. It was awful hard. You know, you had to rest up all day to be able to do it at night. You know.
But you were singing, weren't you, and dancing
no,
and touring?
no,
Weren't
singing.
you?
I've never been a singer.
What were those shows?
I made they were all straight dramas, but I did an album called Dobie for Capitol Records about 1962, and I worked like a dog, and it was pretty good and sold like 60, 70 albums, you know. I mean, it was like
60 or 70?
Yeah, 60 or 70. It was pretty bad. And I was okay, but it just didn't catch on.
So in the 70s, now we move to the 70s, you became an executive.
Well, I did the theater, wandering around, and then finally I went to work for CBS in 1977.
So
I was a program executive. That's a person assigned to the production of shows. I worked on MASH and Good Times, All in the Family, WKRP, Designing Women.
But still TV shows that were lasting long.
Oh, yeah,
times,
and
right?
good shows, good shows. And my job was to just supervise the production, and
So your economics degree didn't come into play
never
there.
has been a thing. No.
Never?
No,
I thought
never has
maybe
been a
when
thing.
you were an executive it meant something.
See, what I really wanted to be was an artist and an architect. But I got busy with Cummings and busy with other things, and the art and architecture kind of went by the wayside.
Were you going to go to architecture school?
Yeah, I was going to go to USC instead of Loyola and study architecture because I like drawing. I loved to draw as a kid. And I was always drawing cars. For example, I drew where you drop the hood and raise the trunk. You know the way the
Yeah,
cars are now
yeah.
aerodynamically? I
Right.
was doing that in the 50s.
Oh.
And I was really into that. And then later I thought, well, I'll draw houses, I'll draw this and that. And it kind of went by the way by because of my acting career.
Well, when did you get to start taking painting lessons? Because this painting on the set is yours,
That's
this
called
is yours.
the Blue Bonnets. That's San Antonio, Texas. I was down there doing a show, and I saw that field, and I thought it would make a great picture.
How did you remember it? Did you
I
go
took
out?
photos.
You
I
took
took
photos.
You mentioned Plein Air earlier.
Yeah, are you a plein air painter?
Plein air means a person, I don't know what the exact translation of plein air is, but it's a person that paints outside in the air.
Right.
And paints like the old masters, you know, like the Monets and
Right.
Van Goghs and all that. But I don't do that, and a lot of people don't do that today. The light changes,
That's true. You have to be a fast painter.
You have to be very fast and very, facile with it, and I'm not. I'm very slow. With everything, I'm very slow, and
So when
I
did
take
you
my time.
when did you get to start taking art lessons then?
About
if you were?
87. I worked for CBS from
oh.
77 to 87.
We've covered your whole life, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, now 80s, a
And
painter.
here I am, yes.
A painter, okay,
A painter.
right.
A painter of light. But anyway, that's another painter. But anyway, so I thought, I've wanted to do this my whole life. And I've been an actor, and I've been this and that, and why don't I go to art school? So I went to an art school here in Brentwood, California.
Called?
They call the Brentwood Art Center. I went there and studied, and I started with pencil drawing.
For how long?
Well, I went once or twice a week for several years.
I was talking to Judith Krantz.
She
the
went there,
author.
did she?
She went there,
Yes.
She was telling me what a fabulous school it is.
Oh, it's a wonderful school, and it started me on the way to being a painter.
This kind of reminds me of the Blue Bonnet.
Yeah,
painting,
that's in the, well, I love bright color. I love form. I see the world, if you notice that picture, I see the world in shapes and form.
Oh, because of your architecture.
I guess. And I saw that scene in Montecito, Santa Barbara, California. And I love color. In other words, my favorite color is yellow, followed by red, followed by blue.
So we have
And
yellow,
you can
red,
see,
blue
and
here.
it creates a brightness, a cheer that means a great deal to me. And I don't care about the reality of it. For example, these things in real life maybe don't look like they look in my paintings, but I would rather have them cheery, uplifting, and give an impression of that.
Oh, here's another one of
The marigolds. That's a
this
field I saw
pictures.
outside Camarillo.
Where do you show this work?
Well, most of my shows have been back east. I have kind of not done too much here in Southern California because I didn't want to take advantage of my career as an actor. I didn't want to be Dobie Gillis, the painter. I wanted to be Dobie Gillis / an artist.
I see.
You know what I mean?
But
I didn't
you're
want to.
showing at the Beverly Hills Classic, which is at the Peterson
The Beverly
Automotive.
Hills Classic is yes, featuring.
they show?
They're going to show fine art, fine jewelry, and antiques. And it's the 18th of May through the 22nd.
And this is the second time they've done this Beverly
Yes.
Hills Classic.
Yes,
So
and there's
it
some
shows
wonderful things there.
art.
They bring things from all over the world.
Right.
There's stuff from a place in Moscow.
Oh, and there's a
yes, from France, from
and
everywhere.
A jeweler from London,
yes,
I think, is coming
yes,
in.
Yes, a jeweler from London, and they decided they wanted to feature my art.
I see. So let's just show some of
And
these things while you're talking.
That I made up.
Oh, this
Of
is
all
out
my
your mind?
pictures, every once in a while I can't find what I want to
This
paint.
looks like the Cotswolds. This looks like
Yes,
England.
yes, it's my favorite thing. You're coming to one from the Cotswolds.
And this
coming
one
up next,
looks
that's called
like-
the Old Stone Bridge. I
Yeah.
saw that in the Cotswolds.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh,
And,
well, wasn't I smart?
Yeah, you're right. And that's been a very favorite piece of many people.
But I see, and then this one.
Well, that's the pathway. That's in Santa Barbara. I saw that building.
Do you live up there, or do you go
No,
up there
I live
often?
right over the hill in the valley here. I live in Encino.
But do you go into areas like this?
I go everywhere and look for things to paint, and I photograph things. That's from England as well. The old stone, not Old Stone Bridge. I think the old
But from
the
photographs.
country village.
From photographs, you
Mostly from sketches or photographs that I take. In other words, I take the photographs and I do the sketching, and then I go home and I sit in my studio, and that's why it's not Plein Air. I sit in my studio and agonize over it for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Do you know how to mix your paints and do all that? You learned that, I guess, at Brentwood.
Carmel, California. Yeah, to answer your question.
You use oil?
Oil on canvas, and these are limited edition prints. That's not the original.
Oh, is that right?
That's not the original, no.
It's a print on canvas.
It's a print, a digital print on canvas. It's done with a computer and a big, like a great big special kind of printer.
How great.
And, but this was a building I saw in Carmel along a busy street. So I put in the other street and the flowers, and I thought it was an interesting...
This looks like that little restaurant.
Yes,
doesn't it?
it's
There's
not.
A charming
it's
restaurant
not. I think
like
it might
that.
be a business building of some sort. But I don't know. I just thought it'd make a good picture. See, I call them pictures. You're supposed to call them paintings, but to me, they're all pictures.
But do you? Does anyone commission you to paint their house?
Every once in a while, they
picture?
talk about it, but I won't do it.
Oh, you don't. You
No.
have to do it yourself.
It never turns out. I want to be the one that sees it for what I want it to be. In other words, it's hard for me to take your concept, your house, somebody else's, and make it into my painting.
Are you going to? Do you continue to act while you're painting?
Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, I was in the Gilligan's Island movie a couple of years ago with my friend Bob Denver, who passed away.
This is a picture of the two of you, but this was not from the movie. This
no,
was
that's from Dobie.
This is from
He was
years
great.
ago.
He was terrific.
Because you were so clean cut, and he was just such a schleppy
well, that was the
guy.
good. We were very much alike, though. We had a sweet relationship. You know, he was the beatnik, the hippie, the beatnik, charming and a lovely guy. You know, I really miss him.
He was like Dustpan, always like dusty around him.
He was wonderful. He was a wonderful actor, and you know, Gilligan, he was just special in that.
So what kind of work?
They had my hair bleached, by the way.
I noticed that.
Yes. Now it's turned a little gray.
Did you do voiceovers? I hear.
I have. I don't do many anymore. You know, my painting really occupies most of my time.
And you're so busy showing them.
Well, back east, but I want to open up the Southern California area.
Yeah, that's why we were talking about.
Yeah, I've done shows in Northern California and around Carmel and Pismo Beach, Modesto, and places like that. But I would like to be in a gallery or two down here.
Well, we opened the day for you.
You sure did.
Door.
You sure did. With the Beverly Hills Classic, maybe that'll open that for
That'll
me.
be great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Listen, my pleasure. Nice to talk to you.
Very nice to have you. Thank you for watching the Joan Quinn Profiles today. Keep writing to 777 South Figueroa, Los Angeles 90017.
You were wonderful.